Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Sam Menzie, and we have a great show for you today. First topic we're going over is the Phillies and their recent struggles. They are 11-16. Since July 1st, we'll be going over that. Then we'll be going over the top players traded at the deadline and the debuts they've made with their new teams. How do they do? The impact they're going to have, all that kind of stuff. After that, we're going over Lawrence Butler's breakout season with the A's, the Rockies, and their young core, and then the White Sox calling up top prospect Kai Busch. But before we do all that, I'd like to ask you to please like and follow the show. We do get a number of questions from viewers to ensure that your question does get read in the air. Please use the link gsmcpodcast.net. It really does help the show, and it really does mean a lot, so thank you so much for that. And let's get back into the show for today. All right, as I said, our first topic is going to be about who other than the Philadelphia Phillies and just what they've done recently. So let's get into it. So, on Friday, which was, of course, the latest show I've done, I did not have the Phillies for the first time in a long time as my number one team in the power rankings. Not only that, I didn't have them as the best team in the NL. And a lot of the reason why that was because of how they've done recently. I mean, they have done very poorly recently. They've really been one of the worst teams in the NL since July, which I think is going pretty under the radar because their standings haven't really been affected because of how humongous of a lead they got out to at the start. And, just how big of a gap they separated themselves with, that they can afford now a stretch like this. That's what happens when you play well before. You can afford stretches like this when your team isn't, kind of clicking together. But, as I said in the starter, since July 1st, they are 11-16, which is really poor. And I just wanted to kind of analyze their performance, go over it, and just go over, is there hope in sight, and overall what I think this Phillies team is. So, getting into it, checking out their schedule from July. I mean, it's really not anything crazy as well. It's not like they've been just playing, amazing teams after amazing teams. It's kind of been some bad series losses. First of all, you played the Cubs start off July in Chicago. You won 2 out of 3 there, so that's a nice job. Then you played the Braves in Atlanta. You lost 2 out of 3. I understand it's in Atlanta, but with the way the Braves have played this year, I kind of think that you should at least win that series, not sweep, but maybe win 2 out of 3 there. So I think that was a little bit of a loss. You did end up sweeping the Dodgers, which was great, but then after that, it kind of went downhill. You then lost 2 out of 3 to Oakland in Philly, which again, that's just unexcusable for where you are as a team right now. But let's just chalk it up and say, a good team had a bad series. Let's do that. Then you go to Pittsburgh, you lose 2 out of 3. I understand they have a great pitching staff, but again, with how young of a team that is, with how well you've done this year, that shouldn't really be a series you're losing. And again, as much as people are going to say, they can afford some good series like this, the NL East is still filled with amazing teams. I mean, the Mets are going to be on your tail, the Braves are going to be on your tail, so you have to take advantage of you have to take advantage of playing these bad teams and subsequently beating them, because that's what good teams do. You can't just play bad teams and lose. You have to beat them. Then after that, you went to Minnesota, lost 2 out of 3. Bad series there. Then at home, you played Cleveland, where you lost 2 out of 3. Again, bad, not good. And then you got swept by the Yankees in your own house in Philly. That's really bad. That was the turning point for me, where I started looking at this team a little bit differently and saying, are they as good as I think? I mean, how would they do that? I understand that, the Yankees were a little bit, their offense had a little bit of a jolt with Jazz Chisholm coming in, but that shouldn't be the sole reason why you get swept in Philadelphia by the Yankees, who had really been struggling up to that point. I understand, again, they had a big amount of momentum coming in with the Chisholm trade, but still, I don't think that should have been something where you just fully lost that series, got swept. And then you went to Seattle, and then you also lost there 2 out of 3. You did win the last game of that series, salvage it, and avoid the sweep, but still, losing 2 out of 3 to a pretty mediocre Seattle team is not the greatest thing. So the Phillies have been struggling a little bit since the start of July, and I think it's really been something that's gone under the radar because, to their credit, they did so well to start the year that they can afford this kind of stretch, have a stretch like this where they're 5 games under 500 and not do as well. So I'll give them credit on that part, but they do have to start stepping up a little bit, and I did want to go over some of the reasons why I think that they have not been as great as they were once in the season, and just, going over overall. So first off, we have to just look at baseball as a sport. Baseball as a sport is very up and down. A lot of times you'll see pitchers with amazing ERAs in the first half, and then ERAs in the second half that make your eyes jump out of your head. Like, how did that guy go from a 2 ERA to a 6 ERA? Baseball is a game where there's so much luck involved that things like this happen. I mean, I'm going to go for an example of Tyler Anderson. Tyler Anderson was one of the worst pitchers in baseball all year. Last year. This year was the Angels' lone All-Star and is around eighth in the AL and ERA. So I'm not sure if I'm getting that exactly right, but he's high up in the AL for ERA. And the thing is, nobody still wanted to trade for him at the deadline, even though he was having such a great season, and he was under control for next year. Why? Because they knew he was getting lucky, and they knew that his ERA is going to really get higher in the second half. I mean, he just had a start versus the Mets, where he got pretty much killed. So this baseball is a game of highs and lows, and I think that I don't think the Phillies were getting lucky per se in the first half, but I think that they were doing a lot better than we expected, and that at some point it was just going to come down and they were going to come back to reality. I think the Phillies are an amazing team. I just don't think they're as amazing as they were doing in the first half. So I think some of it just has to do with the trials and tribulations of baseball, which is okay. And then after that, I think some of it has to do with the entirety of the pitching staff. Christopher Sanchez and Ranger Suarez were pitching like Cy Young candidates at the start of the year. And while they haven't completely imploded, Suarez has had a couple of rough starts, mainly against the Marlins and the Tigers, two teams where he shouldn't really be having rough starts against them. And Christopher Sanchez has come back down to earth a little bit as well. Now again, Suarez still has an ERA sub 2.3. Sanchez still has an ERA considerably below 4. But they just haven't done as great as they have before, and they haven't been as big of factors as they have. Still fantastic pitchers. It's just they obviously were never going to continue like they were at the start. Also, the bullpen. Jose Alvarado's been a little shaky in the closer role. You did bring in Carlos Estevez in one of the better trades at the deadline, but Estevez just blew a game in Seattle as well. Might not have been his fault, as JT Realmuto should probably frame that last pitch. But still, he did blow it, and I do think it's going to be a really good move overall, but it is something you have to watch for the rest of the year. The hitting as well. We always talk about how fantastic this hitting core is, how great it has been, but there are some things you have to look at with it. First of all, Bryson Stott and Nick Castellanos. These guys, simply put, have not had good seasons. Bryson Stott really has not built off the solid season he had last year. Nick Castellanos has now been a non-factor in this Phillies lineup for basically the entirety of the signing that he's come there to Phillies. So overall, both these guys have to step it up and provide a lot more length to this Phillies lineup. And it's not exactly like they got some huge bopper in the middle. You know, we were expecting them to maybe get a Jazz Chisholm, get a Brent Rooker. Instead, they get Austin Hayes, who's more of a platoon bat. So it's not exactly like you got some big bats to be able to combat the kind of deficiencies you have at the back end of your lineup. And yes, every team has these kind of things where not all 1 through 9 players are going to be great hitters. That's true. But while you're getting later into the season, you're facing a lot better teams. You're going to be going into the playoffs. Your lineup has to be better. So I think those two guys really have to step it up. Brandon Marsh has not been good for a little while now. I mean, he's been a below average hitter for a month or so. I think that's all something you have to step up. And then JT Realmuto, he's been hurt for a majority of the season as well. And you had Rafael Marchand and Garrett Stubbs as some of your main catchers. So those guys are not really MLB players. So the fact that you had them taking significant at-bats as you did is also a tough. So I think a lot of it comes down to the pitching staff not continuing the amazing start that they had, which was never going to happen, and then the back end of that lineup kind of being a little bit rough. I mean, they still have incredible talents up there. I mean, you have Realmuto when he's healthy. You have, of course, Schwarber. You have Harper. You have Trey Turner. You have Alec Bohm, who's had a fantastic season. You have Brandon Marsh for a majority of the season when he was doing well. But, I think that, again, second base has become an issue. I think 2 spots in the outfield now with how they performed have become a little bit an issue as well. Realmuto being hurt, who says he won't get hurt again, who says Trey Turner won't get hurt again. So these are things you have to worry about right now if you're a Phillies fan, and things you have to take into consideration as the rest of the season does go on. Now, I mean, I still think that the Phillies are probably the best team in baseball. It's just these trials and tribulations are going to happen within the season, are going to continue to grow on, and it just makes a lot of sense they were going to start regressing in this way for a little bit while now. Again, they weren't just going to continue the wrath they had at the start of the year with how well they were doing. At some point, it wasn't going to come crashing down per se, but it was going to, they were going to come back down to earth a little bit. So I think that has happened now. I mean, they're only still 5 games under 500 in this disastrous stretch that I'm making it out to be. They're still a fantastic, fantastic team. A team I'm very excited to watch for the future. And I think that, again, is probably the biggest World Series favorite the entire year because of just how well that pitching staff is. Now, the NL East still, I think, is going to be a bloodbath. I mean, you're only 5 games above the Braves right now, only 7 or 8 above the Mets, and it wouldn't be crazy if one of those teams took the NL East away from you. I mean, this Braves team has won the NL East like a million years in a row, so it wouldn't be surprising if they just reclaim their territory. Do I think they will? No. Personally, I think in the end it's going to be Phillies, Mets, and then Braves. But, I wouldn't be surprised if the Mets or Braves get close to overtaking the Phillies just because of, potential injuries in the future and, if the pitching staff is still not going to do as great. So I think overall this Phillies team is going to be one of the most interesting teams to watch down the stretch. Going to be really very exciting to see what does happen with this team, what does happen with this NL East, this division overall. And this is going to be a very exciting time to be a baseball fan, seeing how everything happens. And I'm very, very interested to see just overall what comes out of this stretch and what comes out of this Phillies team for the rest of the year. So that is my first segment here, going over the Philadelphia Phillies and their struggles. We're moving into our second segment here, which is going to be talking about trade deadline players who made their debuts with their new teams, going over it, going over how they were, what their impact will be on their new teams. So we'll be doing that, and we'll see you after the break. So thanks, and bye.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm